reauthorization of the American Completes Act, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then, of course, the thank you at the end. For general comments, why is public access important? How many of you are familiar with this piece of legislation? I know others are a little bit more too. There's a couple old timers in the audience. So public access, essentially what this bill does is we've had a proof of concept policy with the National Institutes of Health that's been a permanent policy for the last 2 years at NIH. That requires a final manuscript that's been published in a scholarly journal to be distributed in PubMed Central, or PMC, which is the NIH's database, 12 months after publication. Essentially what our bill does, the Federal Research Public Access Act, is take the NIH policy and open that up to all 11 science agencies. So that's big science that have extramural science budgets of over $100 million. So some examples. Does anybody know some of those agencies and departments? Just shout them out if you know them.
DOD.
Department of Education, Agriculture,
Commerce.
NASA, NSF, Commerce. So there's a lot, and this is going to take our $60 billion science and research budget and really open it up. The embargo period in this piece of legislation is different than the NIH. We've shortened that embargo period to 6 months versus 12 months. So that's slightly different than the NIH policy. So a lot of times we stress that this is research funded by American taxpayers and conducted by researchers funded by public institutions. This research is not widely available. And this has the opportunity to bring federally funded peer-reviewed research to all Americans. Public access to research is important because it ensures that taxpayers reap a maximum return on their investment in government-funded research, and benefit from accelerated discovery, and brings down the barriers of sharing research and information across the spectrum. So I talked a little bit about what this bill does, the $100 million in research, extramural research budgets, the requirement of the researcher to actually deposit their article in the digital repository, and then requires that free online access to each taxpayer-funded manuscript be available as soon as possible, and that's the 6-month embargo period. So currently we've had a lot of momentum behind this bill in the last 8 or 9 months. We introduced the Senate bill last June. The Senate bill was led by Senators Lieberman and Cornyn. Lieberman is actually chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. That's the committee that has jurisdiction over this piece of legislation. Senator Cornyn, a Republican from Texas, has been working on this for quite some time now. That was introduced last June 2009. In the House, we just introduced the House bill back in April. And our lead congressman on this particular bill is Congressman Mike Doyle from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. So when you go in there, you say thank you, thank you, thank you. And then we have several bipartisan co-sponsors. We have everyone from Mr. Boucher, Foster, Harper, Holden, Loughran, Rohrabacher, Washington Schultz, Capano, Frank, Hodes, Kucinich, Lynch, Stark, Waxman. Since then, we've also had Congressman Costello. He's a Democrat from Illinois who's actually going to be, if the House doesn't flip, the new chairman of the Science and Technology Committee. And if anybody knows the Competes drama, this is very, very exciting for us. So this is a great list of bipartisan co-sponsors. I'm just going to bring up one little twist on the House bill that's not necessarily, this is like a 1 in a million shot of something like this happening. Congressman Todd Tiahrt, he's a Republican from Kansas, kind of the western biomedical corridor in Kansas, was saw this bill, saw in the Senate, realized there wasn't a companion at the time, companion being there's the exact same piece of legislation in the Senate there is in the House, and had a conversation with Dr. Francis Collins at NIH and said, this is a really good idea, and I see that your NIH policy is being quite successful. I want to do something like this. So he actually, back in March, introduced FERPA. About a month before Mr. Doyle introduced FERPA, there was a clerical error and a bill number was never assigned, and he was actually running for the Kansas Senate open seat. And they got so busy and the staff never realized it. And they realized it about a month later after Mr. Doyle introduced our bill. And so there's two FERPAs basically in the House, two exact same pieces of legislation. Nothing's different. So we kind of just consider Mr. T-Hart as a co-sponsor of this bill and as a champion, just demonstrating the bipartisanship on this issue. So you might get a question, if the staffer has actually done the research before your meeting, they might ask you why are there two House bills, and it's pretty simple. He just came to this on his own and didn't at the time realize there was a companion. Yes?
Was there ever a number assigned to the other one?
Yes, they both have two numbers, two different HR numbers. I can't even, Julie, do you remember what?
I don't know what the TR number is.
Yeah, it's after 5037. We can look it up and tell you.
Isn't the TR bill different because it's only the agencies under purview of this committee?
No, it's same exact bill. But I know what you're talking about. We can talk offline about that. Any questions there on co-sponsors? If you all are meeting with any of these people on this list, just make sure that you go in to the meeting, at the onset saying, thank you, and we want to work with you to get this bill passed. Some talking points, I think I've already gone through most of these. Federal government funds over $60 billion in basic and applied research. Funding is concentrated within the 11 departments and agencies. And it's important to say, this is non-classified information. It's, DOD's covered, but we're not going to open up anything that's not already out there and being published. From NIH funding alone, it's an estimated that 80,000 papers are published each year. I heard the other day that PMC has 2 million articles in its repository and receives 420,000 unique users a day to that database. Some people will say, wait, a month? No, it's 420,000 users a day. And I think 25% of those users are from .edu, which means there's a lot of people outside of our academic institutions accessing this information, which is pretty exciting. The taxpayer angle, taxpayers underwrite this research. They should have access to it, or we should have access to it. Information sharing with other potential users will advance science and improve the lives and welfare of people in the United States and the world. And then, of course, the internet has enabled us to have a new pathway to access this information. So it's time to do that. And then I'll turn it over to some stuff I don't know about.
So the other issues that we decided to support this year are a bunch of tax incentive issues and then some graduate student loans. So I'll talk about tax incentive issues first, and that's, if you guys are aware of the history of NAGPS, that is one of the reasons that NAGPS was formed, because in 1986 there was a bill that was passed that essentially taxed graduate student stipends. And so since then, NAGPS has been trying to support legislation that would essentially reduce the tax liability of graduate students through various avenues. So there's a bill, HR 5078, which I'll talk about, which specifically focuses on that. And these are some just general comments about student loan and interest deductions and also educational savings opportunities. And those are also in the bills that I'll be talking about, and how they do have long-term impacts on affordability of higher education for graduate professional students. A lot of these educational savings accounts are able to be used for graduate education, not only just undergraduate, but especially for Coverdell, you can actually use that for K through 12, undergraduate or graduate.